Let's get going. Welcome to the Corona Dialogues, Love, Life, and Work in the Human World. And today's topic of the episode 4 is common humanity. And because I figured, talk about common humanity in times of crisis, it can be very helpful. And, I thought like who actually would be an expert about common humanity, or you can actually, not from theory, but as you have the practical, the personal experience. And so I thought of Dawna, and I've known Dawna for a number of years now. We have had weekly calls with Steve Denning and friends about the agile world. And we did a workshop already together in Davos, actually 2, and at the World Economic Forum, before the World Economic Forum. So welcome, Dawna. Great to have you here today.
Thanks very much, Thomas. It's great to be here. I've also had the benefit of Thomas's outstanding ski instruction, by the way. So.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Julia, by the way, too, because she was in our workshop this year in January.
Okay. Excellent.
Highly recommended.
Yeah, exactly.
The way it works is like, the structure of this 1 hour is like I have prepared a number of questions about, common humanity and Dawna's experiences. And anytime you all have questions, just dive in. And otherwise, we'll also have a Q&A session and see how far we get with the time. What I mentioned that I know you, Dawna, but I haven't really introduced you. So I thought like you actually can do this by yourself. So maybe you can tell us about yourself, what you are doing these days.
Well, I'm working like crazy too, and I see Scott's on the call, so he's been really helpful. But I'm working like crazy to finally get some of these tools forward that will help people at this point in time. COVID is sort of one of those wonderful and difficult interruptions that call more forward, call more of us forward and to step up. And so it's, so that's what I'm doing. So I'm still writing away as usual, and also adding on a layer of figuring out how to talk about what I do and bringing forward some programs that will help people. So, yeah.
So
a lot of calls coming in.
Okay. So you're helping people doing what?
Adapting. This is very, hey, Nuria. Yeah, adapting. I mean, nothing like an interruption of this magnitude to get people's attention and to really give the chance to rethink what's going on here. How do I make sense of this world? And so a lot of it is sense making, but the other aspect of it is completely making a higher shift to a different level of I'm going to say consciousness, but it's really about how we work with the world. It's how we relate to each other, and also how we relate to the natural world, which is the fundamental, life support system we have on this planet.
Okay, we can talk about this a little bit later on again. I guess when we talk about the crisis we're experiencing these days. But let's go back a couple of years ago, 12 years ago, 2008. We had another global crisis. Some people already forgot the financial crisis. And you experienced this, firsthand, even though you didn't ask for it. So tell us what happened in 2008.
Well, I did one of those epic crashes, meaning I ended up in my car with whatever I had, stuff in my car. I had some stuff in the storage locker, so those were kind of just stashed in there. But I hit the road. I lost everything. And including all the things they tell you you're supposed to have, like your retirement savings plan, obviously the home was gone, and it's a really effective way of stripping you down to what's left, which is you. So you get rid of all the outside trappings, you get rid of, it just disappeared. So that's what happened in 08, 09. And, you find yourself on the road in a bit of a state of shock, because the theory I'd been running with is one that most people run with, which is, if this is what you believe that if you work hard, good things will happen. You believe that there's certain things steps that you follow that it'll result in success, whatever that is. And so that's that you sort of get confronted pretty full on with that when you lose it all. And I stayed on the road for 9 years. So 9 years, but there's, of course, obviously there's lots of places, like almost a year later, I'm going, okay, I want a home now. And it didn't happen. So it was sort of like a cyclical thing where I'd say, okay, I haven't gained enough out of this experience. And so I needed to, I just needed to keep going until things shifted.
So you were basically on the road for 9 years, but you
Yeah.
were in the Vancouver area, and I mean, you didn't really, I mean, you lived in your car and you had some homes you could stay in, or how did it work?
Yeah, I lived in my car, did house sitting, dog sitting, just bunking in with people if they said they've got a spare room. Whew, okay. And so I did a lot of everything. Over time, in 2012, when my folks died, some inheritance money came in, and I just took off for South America because I have this autonomy and adventure gene that is really high. So as soon as that happened, my daughter and I took off for about 2 months of wandering. Well, it was about 6 weeks, I guess, of wandering in South America. And so that was completely cathartic in terms of just releasing a lot of things and then allowing me to reboot myself.
Well, I can only imagine. It's like when you lost everything. I mean, how was the first night then in the car? I mean, you were probably in total shock where you didn't sleep at all. And I mean,
yeah, I did spend some nights in the car, but initially what happened was a friend had said, look, there's a cabin on the property. I mean, it's really small. And I said, I really don't care. There's a roof, and and I had my dog with me. So we went, and I'm, I mean, I've traveled around the world. I've camped in hurricanes, so I'm pretty adaptable to begin with, but obviously you're just grateful to have a roof over your head and work with what you've got in front of you. So but you're still processing it all, because it's sort of like, this is not how I thought it was going to go down. Right up to the last moment, you're trying to pull the rabbit out of the hat, and it's not, the rabbit's lost. So it is a shock, and it's no different from the shock I think people felt in the COVID, where all of a sudden everything just comes, abruptly stops, and we're working with a completely different set of rules. So yeah, I don't think it's much different. It's that same sort of, where did my future go, and where did the best laid plans lead? And here I am. So yeah, you work with what shows up, very much so. And
wow. So what helped you cope with the new situation? You said like you were traveling with your with your daughter, but was it just traveling distraction, or what really helped you?
Well, my daughter she'd left home, so she, in 2012 we went on that trip because I had the opportunity to break the pattern of just moving from one place to another. But what helps me cope? First of all, I started observing my reaction. So it's like you're in the experience, but you're observing the experience. And that gave me the power, the capability of going, okay, I just need to shift my perspective on this. I don't need to wallow in this spot unless I really want to. Which is it wasn't a fun place. So it's not that you'd sign up for that. So it was just a matter of going, I just need to shift my perspective, see this differently, treat it as a learning experience, or just treat it differently, and then I'll be able to work with it. And it turns out later I learned that shifting perspective scientifically is part of transformation. So that was a handy little intuition that came forward.
So you did everything by yourself, or did anyone help you in this transformation? Did
they help. Yeah, I mean, first of all, people help you just by saying, come on in and stay for a while and don't worry about anything. There were a number of people that did that. I mean, and Scott profiled me perfectly yesterday, but I mean, for me, I've always been extremely self-reliant, and receiving help was tough, because that said something about my inability to really be completely and fully independent. So I had to learn to receive, and that was a really great lesson. I mean, I always wanted to give back in some way, but just having to let people support and help me was an incredible gift.
Yeah. And what people don't know, I mean, you're also an author. I mean, you have authored a number of books, and during this time where you did not really have your own permanent home, you still had the energy to write a book, Decision Making for Dummies. Where did you get this energy from? I mean, how did this work? Yeah.
Yeah, there's three that came out of that. I mean,
Three.
you know,
Okay.
two chapters in the other books, and then the decision making. What happens? I'd been studying the biology of human potential since '03, '02, because really I was looking at it and saying, what does it take for us to fully actualize who we are as a human, you know, as a species, you know, as humans? How do we unlock that potential that we each have, and that we all have, you know, on a wider level? And of course, so in studying the biology of it, you understand, or I understood that I had an option. You know, if I repressed my expression, my need to kind of express myself and put my ideas out into the world, I was going to get depressed. That's the biology of it. You know, it's you know, repression of expression creates depression or aggression. In other words, people hit one another. So I chose the expression route. So I have, before I wrote Decision Making for Dummies, I had about, I mean, I've been writing for I think it's 7 years. Nobody ever saw that, but I've been writing, and it was just my way of staying sane. And so you write anywhere you can. You're writing in coffee shops, you know, I mean, you write anywhere you can find a place, and it really trains you train yourself to focus. And it, you know, I mean, really, it's a great way to train a flow state. If you now that I know more about that, but it's just you just sort of clear the distractions and just really focused on that that edge, if you will, between where I am now and what I need to put forward, and keep pushing the ideas forward. So the anchor was the awareness that we needed to, as a species, we needed to treat our planet with a whole lot more respect than we were. And so that every time I'd sort of get dipped down into the holy moly, you know, of just like the situation, which was sometimes brutal, then I had to go back to that and say, all right, you know, do I try to be mainstream, or do I stick to my purpose and my vision for what's ahead? And it, you know, there was really no other option for me. I just had to stick to that purpose.
Wow, so it's pretty amazing. It's like I cannot imagine like being in a situation like this, you know, not knowing where I will live, you know, will stay next week, and at the same time writing a book, which actually also takes some energy, gives you energy, but also takes some energy. That's pretty amazing. That's really pretty amazing.
Thank you.
Well, you said like your experience taught you a lot about using the gap between, say, the known and the unknown. Right. To deepen connection with a truly inspiring sense of purpose. What do you mean by this? I mean, did you find your purpose in life, or what do you mean by this gap between of the known and the unknown?
Well, I mean, it's sort of like the certain and the uncertain in that sense. We have, you know, whatever it is that's certain is the security, how we define ourselves from external security and all the relationships that hold things in place. And the unknown is what happens when those aren't there, and or what happens when, like the situation we're in. So the edge then is the place where you really dig deeper into, you know, into a deeper place within yourself to be able to achieve something better, bigger than me. And that's where that goal was. Like, it's sort of like a lofty goal, but it's a lofty goal because it's bigger than me. I mean, if I pick something small, I might as well go work at Walmart. But so it's just picking something that I'm really willing to go for, and at any cost. And of course, one of the costs was homelessness, but it was also probably the best thing that could have happened too. I don't know if that answers the question, but
well, best thing that could happen to you in retrospect, even though it was, you know, hard. It was a very steep road, you know. It's like, you know, I'm not sure if I can say, well, you know, if I want to find my purpose in life, I just like lose my home or anything.
No, I wouldn't recommend it. It's optional. You don't have to do that. but the beauty of doing it, to be honest, the beauty of that experience is that it no matter whether, I mean, there's lots of people who've been through adversity. They've been through, I mean, you know, the immigrants, the migrants, anybody that's had even a mild interruption to their life, a financial loss or divorce or whatever it is, they're all, from a process, you know, from an experiential process point of view, they're all the same thing. It's just in the sense that you get a chance to throw everything up in the air, take a look at it, decide what you want to do going forward. So that's that's the beauty of it. It's I mean, what I ran into that I didn't anticipate, the brutal side of it was the judgment, massive amounts of judgment. So people really want you to be in the mainstream. And this is where sort of, I think people complain about, we don't have enough leaders. It's like, yeah, you probably suppress them into a cave. So it's just brutal from that point of view. I mean, to the point where people would put pressure on my daughter in order to get to me to say, shouldn't she just, work at Starbucks or something? And I kept sticking to the writing. I kept sticking to what I believed to be important, and what I believe to be, a role in the world. There's certainly places and times, I mean, I'm describing it now as if it was clean, but it was quite messy, and a lot of times. And there was also those kinds of moments where you're going, will I be alive when we get there? It was just an awareness that sooner or later the consciousness would show up. But at the same time, you're wondering when, just how long is this going to take? And here we are. We're in a really excellent place to move from self-interest to a shared goal together on a wider level. So
that's still pretty amazing. So I mean, the whole crisis, I mean, definitely, I mean, has changed you as a person. And I mean, how has it changed, you as a person? What if you compare, let's say, a dawn of 2003 and then a few years later, I mean, or in 2020, how has it changed you?
Well, for one, I've learned to work with all of my faculties. I used my mind a lot and used will a lot. In other words, if I wanted something to happen, it was sort of make it happen. But to work with what we have in the world, you have to acknowledge what else you've got going on. And in my case, it's a high level of energy sensitivity. So it's using sensing then. And sort of brings together your faculties of intuition as well, which you could, I mean, I could see this coming in 02, 03, 04, that awareness was, my gosh, we've got it. There is going to be an interruption. What we don't know is what it's going to look like. So it brings on all of that wider range of intelligences that we each have. And that's a pretty special gift. So that's different. The other thing that's different is I've had so many things yanked out from underneath me that it's just like, meh. So you're kind of used to it in that sense. And there's no, there's no real panic around it. You do have to balance yourself more. I mean, I completely committed to the full spectrum of emotional, social, emotional, physical, spiritual and mental health. It's a well-rounded set of practices that go with that, and I stick to that, because if I don't, I can't function. So it's being very aware that when I'm picking up on anxiety around me or people's anxiety or wherever it's coming from, right away I've got to go for a hike in nature. I've got to do some. Lately, my thing is qigong, Shaolin. It's just a hoot. So I'm doing that, or yoga, but it's just, working it through, clearing it out so that you're constantly able to stay in balance.
With the COVID crisis, so it seems like, we know that it's a global crisis. So was it like a déjà vu for you? It's like, okay, we had the global financial crisis. Now we have, pandemic. Was it déjà vu, or what were your first reactions?
No déjà vu per se, just an awareness that sooner or later we were going to get a wake-up call, and the question is, what's it going to look like? And I mean, I'm not alone with that. I was facilitating environmental stuff back in the early 90s and in environmental policy, and the writing was on the wall then, but of course, the patterns are deep, they're systemic, they're deep. Now they're more on the surface, where they're more, we can see them. We can see the underpinnings of some of these decisions that are being made, definitely politically. So, we knew that there was going to be a systems reset, and here we are. That's what I mean by that. It's one of those things where we had this disconnect between humanity being the dominant species in the world, which is, is a great responsibility, and yet there was not a full acceptance of that responsibility. So a lot of unethical decisions have been made. So that's the one aspect of it, the one layer of it. The other one is that, for economic activity, the premise was that what we can't count doesn't count. And so the credit line on the environment has been well overdrawn. And so now we're in the place where we have to decide how to reconnect back to that. So it's just that there's multiple layers of awareness that you're tracking, but it's a knowing that if we don't fix this gap, this disconnection that happened back in the days of, I'm not sure whether to blame bacon or what, but it's just somewhere along the line, somebody said, hey, that nature, that's a really bad thing. We got really split from the living system. And yet organizations that succeed and do really well are managing themselves because, as part of the living system. So now it's for the rest of humanity to catch up, and the institutions that we rely on as well to be redesigned completely.
Well, that's a good point. So would you agree then? I mean, people say a crisis is a bad thing, but it is also a chance.
Oh, huge opportunity.
So yeah. What opportunities do you see now with the Corona crisis?
Well, from a workplace point of view, I guess it depends on where people are, what's most relevant for people. But if I look at it from a business point of view, the focus has been on profit at all cost, and the cost is high. So now we get to rethink that completely. The workplace environment has been brutal for a lot of people, hence the disengagement, stress-related illness, the list goes on. Chance to rethink that. When people say we value our people, and the first thing that happens in the crisis is they lay them off, it tells you what they really value. So that's another place where we can reinvent and rethink what we're doing. I think from a leadership point of view, the self-leadership point of view, the question is, am I a gerbil on the wheel, or am I part of something bigger? And that's a personal reflection. So that's especially now that people get to work from home. So you're seeing all these wonderful things come out with families reconnecting and getting together, and and having to be in close quarters, which means they get to really work, have conversations with each other, create. There's a father daughter singing thing that was on YouTube the other day. It was just mind-blowing. So that you can't really, all of a sudden, if they said, okay, you go back work tomorrow, you can't subtract that freedom, that autonomy. You can't all of a sudden go back and say you need to go 9 to 5 and report when you go to the bathroom, which is apparently what one company was doing. So it's one of those things where you're really going to have to raise the level of leadership to a much higher level. You need the wider set of skills, a deeper set of skills to work with the conditions we're in, and it's not optional.
So it's really a chance to integrate humanity and work.
And not just that. Yes, exactly. And not just that, but also to go back into have greater respect for the source code, which is the environment, the planet itself. That's the source code for life.
So suppose, okay, let's say if I worked in a big, huge corporation, and I experienced what you also described, I like to have a more human environment, but yet I'm only a little resource, I'm a nothing. How can I help that this company I'm working for moves toward, let's say, a shared purpose? I mean, what can I do as an individual? Can I do anything? Or do I just have to wait and hope that management at the top will do something?
Well, I think this goes back to what you said earlier, which is, the theme for this conversation, which is with common humanity. This is not a Lone Ranger kind of operation we're in here at all. It's one where we really have to pull together, put a goal, agree to a goal that is massive, and then work toward it. It's shifting away from profit, which, the quarterly reports, that's a really teeny little goal. And it also serves not very, it serves the few over the many. And so it's a really big chance to raise the bar. And that means people working together. It means we've already seen a lot of cooperation. We're seeing more collaboration. We have the tools. We've got self-managed companies and self-managed ways of doing things. We've got, there's the agile, there's some shift now towards, instead of competing with one another to get attention, let's work together. Well, and that's a huge relief.
Before I open the floor for additional questions from you, from the others, what other lessons learned can you share with us, like that were applicable in this kind of crisis?
Well, I think the simplest one is to tune into how you're feeling, and if you're feeling off, then quickly do something that makes you feel that restores you, whatever that is, because we're really talking about a lot of training your focus and knowing when to not focus. So it's the combination of focusing on something, but also not focusing on it. And so the self-care, the imperative for self-care, I don't think has ever been higher. Mm-hmm. There's also a lot of people who have been experiencing anxiety. It's really a call to be absolutely present with the moment. I mean, that's one thing I learned from if I thought about the future, I just worried myself to bits. If I just sort of stayed present in the moment, that much I could work with. So you kind of have to bracket off, what can I deal with that doesn't take me into a state of overwhelm, but just allows me to get things, to sort of function effectively, not just function as in barely coping, but function well.
Well, that's interesting because that you mentioned presence, because like common humanity, as the others may know, is there are three parts to mindful self-compassion. It's common humanity, self-kindness, and mindfulness. The common humanity basically is, like I say, it's the antidote to the loneliness we may experience with social distancing. That we know, all humans are flawed, works in progress. Everyone fails, makes mistakes, and experiences hardships in life. Some people more than others. But it's a human experience. This is what common humanity is all about. We don't even have to be in the same boat, but we make certain experiences which are not very pleasant. And then self-kindness, which is like self-love. It's not egotism. It's appreciating who we are. That when we feel bad, basically taking moments like, okay, I do feel bad. I am sad. I don't try to bury, my feelings, my emotions. I don't want to run away from them. They are real, and I want to experience them. How can I feel them? Let's say in my presence. How can I feel them in my body? And then, last but not least, mindfulness, being present. It's very, very powerful. It's nothing new. It's nothing new. I mean, it's like ages old. I mean, it can start with a very simple exercise. Actually sometimes when I'm about to facilitate some, I say, difficult conversations, with meetings, I have started with a moment of silence where I just ask the attendees, like, okay, why don't we just for 1 minute, let's arrive and just listen to our own breathing for 1 minute. And we don't have to say anything. And then we start. The atmosphere just changes within 1 minute. And it's pretty amazing. So mindful self-compassion, I think, especially in times of crisis, the crisis we are experiencing these days, can be very, very helpful. I'm not saying I'm not an expert. Okay, I'm struggling, by myself. I have my own business, or I'm an independent consultant. No revenue at this point. And do I feel excited every day? No, I don't. Of course not. But I also have to acknowledge and give in and say, feel the pain, feel the anxiety or the fear, you name it, and go from there. And knowing that I'm not the only person who's having this experience can sometimes help. And there was one thing when I asked you about, what can an individual person, person in a huge corporation, what can they do? And you gave us some examples. And there's another exercise, which actually I also experienced in the company. Christian is the CEO of Vorsprung at Work. And they do, at every meeting, they start with a check-in. Christian, maybe you can explain what is a check-in at a meeting and how does it change the atmosphere here?
Well, I guess it's a little like your breathing a minute. What we do is, before we get into any sort of issue, we ask one another, what's up? Like, how are you? What's your current state of mind? And that gives us basically a base that we can then start working on, because we know, what the emotional situation of the others is like, and you can instantaneously relate to one another completely differently than if you hadn't had that check-in. And you're in a much deeper space and just a different place that you can then elaborate from. And we also have a check out, as in, how do we feel after this meeting? What happened during this meeting with our emotions, with our flow? Do I feel better? Do I feel worse? What happened? So basically we're framing these meetings with check in and check out.
Brilliant.
Okay. I'm curious, Julia, because you're working with a lot of students. You're a dean of a business school. How does the younger generation view this? Would there be space? Would they be open for this kind of this kind of practice?
Yeah, so I've been really interested to hear various suggestions of managing the meetings both for students and for executives or teams. And I think that, you know,
Audio is
beyond,
really bad, Julia.
Yeah,
I'm
speak up a
struggling
little
to
bit.
understand you.
I wonder if I should phone in.
Well, if you just speak loud, you know, we'll just give it a
Closer
try.
to the mic.
Closer to the mic.
Is
Yeah.
that better?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So I've been fascinated to hear about different strategies and suggestions for managing, you know, remote learning or remote meetings. And just as we've heard, I think, you know, how we establish at the beginning these calls is so important. You know, there's establishing the ground rules in terms of, you know, how to use your mute. Don't go to the bathroom during the call. I just heard of Vancouver had their first online council meeting and someone flushed a toilet during the call. So yeah, so not good.
That's
But
epic.
then as we've just heard, there's, you know, attending to how people are feeling. And I like the suggestion just made in terms of the check-in, check-out. I think that's great. But we can also, and Thomas, I guess this is going to what you're saying, is we can model what being present means. We can model mindfulness by starting a meeting. You know, you've suggested the deep breathing, but there can also be a reflections of gratitude, you know, a quick go round to hear what everybody is grateful for. That's kind of in the spirit of appreciative inquiry. Can you get people's minds in a more positive space? Maybe after they've all taken a few deep breaths, or, you know, or you could even take turns if this is a weekly meeting that where maybe one person shares something funny or lighthearted or something inspiring, you know, despite the depths of despair. And I think, Dawn, I think this is what you're getting at. There are still stories of incredible selflessness, of creativity, of generosity. So, you know, maybe each meeting somebody shares something that they heard in their local community that's really inspired them. So I think we really have to attend. I've never been a huge fan of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but I'll tell you, this pandemic has brought it into such sharp focus for me. You know, that if people are worried, and Dawna, your story is so inspiring, if they're worried about basic things, basic security needs, about where they're going to sleep, will they have enough food? Can they take care of their loved ones? When interpersonal relationships, that need for affiliation have been interrupted, you know, without those things in place, how can anybody self-actualize, right? It's such a challenge to see beyond the basic needs. So I think, you know, attending to those basic needs at the beginning of a call hopefully helps people get in a better mindset where they can focus, where they can bring their sort of cerebral and creative strengths to the problem. So I really like what I'm hearing on the call. So thank you, everybody that's contributed to that.
You know, what you said, like also with a check-in, what you just said, Julia, yesterday we had in our online dialogue in German, we asked the question, what will be the first day back when things are more or less normal? What will be the first day, what it will look like? And I said, like, I do hope that the employers or, you know, the teams, they just meet and really ask this question, well, how are you doing? And what have you been experiencing? What were your struggles? I mean, do you have any new ideas? You know, how can we help? If a company, this is my hypothesis, if a company, if a team, if they think, okay, we're back in business, let's go back to whatever we did before, and they don't give the people, the individuals, the chance to arrive, to check in, I think it's going to backfire big times. Unless, you know, people are just happy to have a job, but then their heart is not in it. What would you say? That's a question for all.
Can I just comment on something you said, Julie? Because one of the things I learned in this journey is that when we are in survival mode, yeah, there's Maslow's hierarchy, but the past, what we've done is survive at any cost. In other words, there's, desperate actions for survival have made things worse. And what we're in now is a place where we co-create to survive, as opposed to, this is when we reinvent. It's not about going back to what you just said, Thomas. It's not about if we think we're going back to the old, if we do it, we're, that's doomed. This is a place where expression and creative expression to solve some of these bigger problems that we're facing, including the ones around what does our workplace look like now. That's where everybody works together together to make it happen. It's not going back to the old where it's every person for themselves. So it's a major shift.
Thomas,
Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to say that I like what you said about if employers don't recognize the humanness that's involved with their employees, because people just being filed away in a personnel office for so many years can have a negative effect on you long term. And I think people are aware when their managers approach them, if it's not authentic, then it can come off much worse than, so that's all.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's the leadership challenge. That's the one that says you can't just fly off the top of your, you can't have the dissonance between thinking one thing and feeling another. You have to be completely unified. You've got to bring those parts online completely. So yeah.
I just don't feel this crisis has been severe enough yet to actually bring back humanity into the workplace, because it's been eradicated from the workplace almost to 100%. And I feel that the managers that are in charge of it, that could, speaking in Joel's terms, approach employees with compassion and very, very genuine interest. They haven't learned to behave like that. They haven't learned to be like that in corporate contexts. And I don't feel this has been going on for long enough for them to seriously adapt a different mindset.
And that brings out a question that I have throughout all of this. When we talk about check-ins, when we talk about sharing emotional state and so forth, how do you get to a point with any given group that you have the trust to be able to reveal what's going on inside you? Because classically, so often, there have been plenty of people who've been sitting there just waiting to take advantage of that, to try to dominate as a result of hearing somebody else express something that could be interpreted as weakness. There, how do you get to that point where you trust everybody else enough to be able to share what's inside?
The moment that weakness becomes the new normal, we've made it.
Well, I wouldn't say weakness, I would say vulnerability. This is what Julia said. And this is, it's pretty amazing. It's like, it's this old norm, boys don't cry, which is like, so outdated, it's like, and it's tough, but yes, showing, having the courage to show our vulnerability would be a huge accomplishment. And it's more than, it would be foolish not to create the space in a working environment. Of course, the question is like, how can you get there?
The cracks in the C-suite have been evident for a long time. I can recall in 2011, I came across an article out of the UK where the senior, the C-suite people were coming in, and one guy just came into the office and burst out crying because he was so disconnected from what had meaning and purpose for him. And so we're seeing it not show up in where you think it's going to show up, which would be in the workplace. We're seeing it show up in depression statistics. We're seeing it showing up in people that are just taking themselves offline. The suicide rate amongst men is ridiculously high in almost every country, although it is going up in some countries with women as well. So it shows up in just how people are coping or not coping. And I think that's indicative. If you actually look at the layers of companies, inside a company and where the leadership comes, it's typically not at the middle to upper level management. It'll be in some deeper part of the organization where somebody who does care, who is busy building connections, has the greater sphere of influence.
Which brings to mind an interesting question that I've been thinking about. In the Boston Globe ideas section a couple of weeks ago, one commentator, one columnist wrote an opinion piece and citing how there's evidence now that says in a time of global crisis, which we're in as we are right now, the old classic doomsday situations, the classic prediction was that everybody would turn to basically animal behavior and be at each other's throats.
Yeah.
And yet what we're seeing and what we've seen in multiple situations is quite the opposite, that people recognize we're in a common danger situation and they turn to help each other out. Can you comment on that? Is there enough evidence to really believe the latter, that it's bringing out the best in people, not the worst?
I think for me, the focus is on amplifying the best, because people have, I mean, when fear is ignited in the brain, it takes up pretty much all the real estate. It's very hard, the neural real estate that is, it's very hard for people to get off it. But when they know that there are some good things going on in the world, it gives hope. And so I think a lot of our job is to focus on the great things that are happening. There was a Canadian Business Social Responsibility webinar yesterday where they shared a whole bunch of companies that are doing some really good work. We've got companies that are showing up on the Bloomberg. I started making a list called the Adaptive Agility Awards, the ones that have been turning around their insides in 4 days to produce hand sanitizer. I mean, these are the companies that are really demonstrating both social responsibility, but just adaptive. I mean, they planned for that. So they actually had their machines tooled to be adaptive enough that they could pivot. So these are the exciting moments. I think it's not a watch and see thing. It's very much a matter of support and encourage and amplify the great things that are going on.
Dawna, when you mentioned that male suicide is high in most countries, I wonder whether that could be because we isolate people. Like, for instance, like in Northern Ireland, more people have died from suicide since the signing of the 1998 peace agreement than people that have actually died during the Troubles. Because now that we have that peace, we re-prison people by isolating them, and I think that can be very harmful.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah, we've been talking about this with respect to, and maybe I should actually, before I comment on that, maybe just go to Julia. Can you bring out that point that you put in the chat pane? Because I think it's super relevant.
Yeah, sure, thank you. So I really
Can you move
closer to the mic?
To the microphone again?
leaning right in. Is that better?
No.
A little
No.
bit louder. You have to speak up.
Oh my goodness. Okay. How about now?
Way
Yes.
better.
Okay. I've really been reflecting a lot on this word essential. Essential workers, essential work, essential travel, essential consumption. And what we're seeing, Dawna, to your point, is this incredible pivot going on by our most resilient organizations to switch from whatever they were doing to producing, essential goods. And of course, a lot within, sort of the PPE space. But also what I've seen is people really struggling. This is on my Twitter feed. I've seen people really questioning the essentiality of their own work, like their own profession, what they've spent the bulk of their adult lives pursuing. And faculty, for example, saying they realize that this research fascination they've had, and been flying to conferences to present and all these trappings that have sort of reinforced their egos, that actually their work isn't essential at all. And really struggling with that, going, oh my God, I've dedicated my life to something that really doesn't matter. And I think, that's a tough one for a lot of people that they're struggling with.
Yeah, and I think that's very much a part of the re-examination process. Just like holy cannoli, what have I been doing? And I don't think I think pretty much everybody's hit a spot in this journey where you just sort of, is this still what I need to be focusing on? Is this still where I'm at with this? when it affects your entire choice of career, it's definitely tricky. But it doesn't mean it's throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I think it means looking at how, you know, how to bring it back into relevance. I mean, businesses in the same place, businesses that have focused on profit have made themselves increasingly irrelevant at any cost. You know, the ones that have just given up, you know, like aren't paying attention to their people, aren't paying attention to the ecological inputs. Again, great place for them to kind of refocus, reset, and reinvent completely.
Exactly. So what kind of resilience is needed to accept that and pivot in a positive direction, right? You know, sort of pick yourself up by the bootstraps and, you know, redefine oneself or redefine one's organization, and who will not have that ability, or how can we help people who are really struggling with that so that suicide isn't the attractive option?
Well, I guess that can only really be facilitated by making clear that learning is not a crime. Like learning is part of life, and shifting is part of life. And also reconsidering oneself is part of life, not a weakness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Once that becomes socially acceptable, I think we're in a completely different world. But it needs examples. It's just like Dawna was saying, we need to tell the stories. And the storytelling is extremely powerful. And if we share our stories, and like just Dawna has shared hers very openly, which is a fantastic story. I don't want to check out yet, but it's very inspiring to see how an individual can cope with virtually anything that's thrown at her, and, you know, come out stronger. And, you know, what a great example of, you know, leading a responsible life and not pitying oneself and picking oneself up and, you know, just writing the next chapter out of one's own strength. That's just a wonderful example.
Thank you.
Dawna,
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, it's Scott here. I've been silently listening. Just on, sorry, CK, is it Christian? Your first
Christian,
name?
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'll be
yeah,
yeah.
It's okay. I certainly appreciate that, you know, the dialogue. So, you know, the dialogue and Dawna's point, who I only just got to meet recently. So I'm very glad to be here already. So Christian, I guess one thing that I would suggest is the universities that I work with, some universities, and the universities that I work with in terms of engagement, which is my area. The one thing that I note, albeit this is anecdotal, but those that do seem to strongly embrace a narrative of people being vulnerable, and they have stronger mental health provisions and things like this. One of the issues that they do see is, as people decide to become more vulnerable, unfortunately, it sometimes leads them to actually it's not matched up with them improving their resilience. So there's this sense of everybody's vulnerable. And so then everybody is very soft with each other, which has its place, but then people aren't challenging to one another. And so then people lose some of the resilience and strength and push and drive that you want them to develop in life. So I'm just curious as to what Dawna's perspective would be on that dichotomy, or whether I'd be very happy to have all this completely wrong, but it is something that I've noticed and they've noticed too.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's anything. I don't think it's correct to label anything as wrong. Experience is experience. But one of the things that, when I think about vulnerability, I mean, this is something that I had to face down because I didn't, you know, it's hard to admit that everything you've done for a long period of time was epic fail. And then you sort of go from what I joke, you know, one epic fail to another. So vulnerability, though, when it becomes like you've described, Scott, which is, it's one where there's a bit of a disconnect between vulnerability and where you're going, because that business of grit, as they now call it, which is a nice term, but that business of grit comes from seeing where you're going with it, knowing what you're bouncing back from. So anytime there is, like, if you look at the military and lessons from that quarter or that area, then they're always working toward a shared goal of some kind. And the bounce forward is sense of belonging. So if there's vulnerability without some kind of belonging, it can be very rough and result in what you've just talked about. If you have vulnerability with the eye towards achieving something better or greater or shared, common, then you've got an opportunity to really learn and work with the worst that gets thrown at you. I've had this conversation with a number of people now who have been through really tough stuff, and we see it as a lens or as a door or portal, call it what you want, but it's a place where you take those those really raw moments and work with them to together or just to create something that really sticks in terms of the human experience, being able to keep striving, keep going past the last set of limits you saw on the road and just keep going. I don't know if that provides perspective.
Really helpful. Thank you. That's, yeah, superb. Thank you very much.
And Dawna, would I be able to ask you a quick question, or actually, Norina, if you want to go? I don't think you've talked before.
No, go ahead, Joe.
Okay.
I will go after.
Dawna, when you said that you have one of the biggest gifts was for you to accept love, when people had told you, come on and stay for a while, don't worry about anything. Would it be fair to say that that when we accept love, we can be vulnerable, or that that makes us vulnerable to potentially our shame, and that maybe that accepting love was uncomfortable because we can be afraid that it might trigger just these intense emotions?
Yeah, I think there's no or in there. I think there's an and. So it's, yeah, definitely you touch shame around it. I mean, clearly I did not live up to societal expectations of how to live a regular life. That I failed on completely. And so it does take you to that one side of, the one side of it, which is shame, and the other side of it, which is extremely rich. And you have to deal with the shame. I mean, I had to clear that out. I was aware of it. Because in certain environments, I'd feel completely diminished, especially the ones where there'd been a heavy level of judgment, and where there were people, and usually they're people close to you because they have the highest level of judgment, and they have a very specific idea of what you're supposed to, how you're supposed to live your life according to them. We even had one instance where somebody was going to come in and run an intervention to put me on track. And that could have, I'm not sure what that would have looked like, but it was, you just have to, in those conditions, it's both, but the awareness of the shame allowed me to go, okay, I got to clear that because that's just going to get in the way. And I don't want that. That's too low an emotion, too low a frequency in terms of emotions to carry around. So, yeah, very much so. Thank you. Great question.
So I would like to maybe collect a little bit and express at the same time all my ideas that I have. Dawna, thank you for opening so much to us and sharing all this deep story. And I'm very inspired. I know you already for a while, and we also shared some very intense moments. But what I want to share here is that there is such a need of so many components in our current lives and work, that is not only that being courage or being more self-managed or being more empathetic. So it's not only one component or two. We need all of them. We need the collective component and the systemic part as well. So I want to see it in an easy way, but I see it very difficult because we need the change of every individual. So we have to go to this awareness part to be able to be courage to say no to this, not to this system, not to go on doing some practices against the planet and against the humans, but we need as well the change in the organizations and in the leadership. So what it looks like, we could make a little on our side, it could influence everything. But when I look at the whole, I see that either the change is fully, or it's very difficult to bring it together, because at the end we have some strength, some heavy parts that are pulling harder. And the only hope I have is that, as Dawna said before, that we can, I can see that those companies that were already strong before, human-centered before, now they are just on the news doing extraordinary things, because they already were like that. And there are companies that were not like that. They are trying, sometimes are trying just to be on the news with some, nobody can believe decisions that they have done. But of course, it's like, again, short term. So they make a short-term decision to be in the news, but they are not part of their DNA as companies. So what I can see, those being good or having a different culture, of like Zappos that are now doing something exceptional. So those were already there and they are doing exceptional things. My hope is that if those doing big things can come together with a small ones like each of us that want to go into this direction and bring this inspiration to the others, or at least that the others can feel there is no other way to go, is what we can try to make an impact. But I can see those companies that are in the traditional way of thinking, that they are still in that hole and they are not able to think further. So as I think Christian was saying, the crisis is not still hitting them hard. They are thinking it's just a bad moment, and they will go out of this and still think the same, because they are thinking right now the same about their people. They are treating them badly, and they will go out again as heroes and trying to go at profit, nothing more than that. So I don't know really how we are going to do this, but I still have hope.
Well, so do I. And I mean, there's a pretty big community of change agents like yourself who have been working, and Thomas, of course, and others. But we've all been working to help these companies not go through this as roughly as they're going to, as they've chosen to do so. So, but that if that's their choice, then this is the place where it gets really fragile. Because relying on those entrenched patterns, the deep dynamics, the system, the stuff that holds it in place, it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, I sort of coined it in 2007. I think I called it personal growth for business. So it's basically no different from us looking at ourselves and saying, what beliefs are in my way? What beliefs support what I'm trying to do? You know, what I want to accomplish in the world. You're really looking at systems in companies exactly the same way. What systems work against a capacity to make that radical jump in the moment that we're in. And I think there's a lot of hope and a lot of possibility. It's just going to be a matter of people all of a sudden coming attuned to the fact we can't play this card anymore. We can't do this anymore. We can't keep running down these same, it's like being in a gerbil wheel going around and around, and all of a sudden noticing you ended up in the same place. So the companies that fail to do that will fail. I don't see any other way. Mm-hmm. And I think the beauty of this moment for people who are working for those companies is they know ultimately that they have a choice. So we are the architects of our destiny in that sense. We always know how we can, we're the ones that are responsible for making, for choosing how we experience something. And that's the power that we have.
Well, I still have quite a few, lots of questions and new ideas. And yet I checked the time and we're past the hour already. So Dawna, I really want to thank you so much for sharing your stories, your experiences with us. I mean, this is not common humanity. In theory, this is really like, living common or having lived common humanity. So thank you so much. And also thank you all for this very interesting and inspiring dialogue. As you have noticed, I have recorded the dialogue, and I will share with you the Zoom download link. And probably I will see if time allowing, edit it a little bit and upload it to my YouTube channel, if that's okay with you. and share the chat with you, because it was very, very deep, very, very helpful. And I was really looking ahead to next week, because there are so many topics that we could talk about, like, vulnerability and leadership. I have a question: what do we have to teach our business students so they understand that, what we can do these days, that we can build and shape the human world? And also the question: how can we all become change agents, regardless of our position? So if there's anything also you'd like to see, on the agenda next week, please let me know. Drop me an email, and I will let you know probably by early next week, which topic it's going to be. But again, at this point, thank you all so much for being here, for this, for sharing your insights, asking your questions. Just great time. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thanks,
facilitating,
Thank you.
Thomas.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas.
Be safe.